Speaking of suffering, this is suffering that I personally haven't experienced, which is passing a kidney stone. But I've had family, that I've had family that have and know what an agonizing thing it can be. But I've learned about a new treatment of it, and that is to go to Disneyland. I don't know if you've seen this in the news, but apparently doctors were getting a lot of reports from people who were going to Disneyland and going on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, which is a roller coaster there that is, those big drops and all the hairpin turns and everything. And people with kidney stones were coming back to them and saying, I feel better after going on that. And they were getting so many of those that scientists finally decided they were going to do an experiment. So they built this 3D model of a kidney and put kidney stones in the model, put it in a backpack, and had different people ride Big Thunder Mountain Railroad with their kidney backpack. And they found it actually is true that if you're riding in the front, 17% of people passed a kidney stone. And if you're riding in the back, 64% did. So, it's not 100%, but it does make the happiest place on earth a little happier for some people, I guess. But some things can have this surprising good benefit out of them that we're not expecting. And that's what I want to talk with you about today out of a passage in James. We started a new series last week that we're calling 2 Feet Out, with basically the premise being that that's as far as we can see right now on so many levels where we're trying to do long-term planning, and it's just hard on every front, anything, and it's easy to get overwhelmed thinking of all the things that we can't do. But flipping that around and saying, okay, what can we see? What do we know is right in front of us that we can focus on and pay attention to? And so just to leave some of the future worrying to God instead and say, how can we be really present to what He has given us? And it was brought to my attention, and this was a good point, I thought. Somebody said, actually, sometimes we can use how busy we are with what's going on right now to not address paying attention to the future. Whether that's thinking about retirement, or whether that is, I can say I'm too busy to exercise. I can't, and usually I am. But it's easy to do things that way. But really, I would say that this is not, we're not talking anti-planning, because sometimes the work of the present is preparation, and that is what we have to do in the moment. So God isn't above our planning. He's just saying, let's not count all on our efforts and our view of the future as being what matters, and to entrust that more to Him. So we're going to focus in these next few weeks on some things that I think really are what's pressing on our actual everyday lives right now. I shared a quote last week too that said, our everyday concerns receive little attention in the church. And I don't want that to be how you feel, that really the things that matter to you are not being talked about here. So we're going to try to do that in this series. One of the things that we'll talk about is work, because you spend a lot of time there. And so how does that integrate with faith? And we're going to do a conversation with Mike LeBang. I'm really looking forward to, because Mike is one of these people who has been really intentional on the job in construction of going, what does it mean to be a Christian on the job? So I'm looking forward to that. We'll probably talk about money. I'm planning to talk about sexuality and gender, because that's a big topic for everybody right now. If there's one thing that I talk about less than money here, it's probably sex. So, but I go, like another thing we said earlier is, if the gospel isn't big enough to touch on the fullness of humanity, then it's not the gospel, right? And if we can't speak to things in church, even if we don't have like all the answers on anything, if we can't talk about it openly, where else are you going to go to learn how to put your faith and the rest of your world together? So lots of things that we're going to be covering. And if there are other things that are really pressing on you right now that you would really like to see addressed, I'd love to talk to you about that, because we want to make this as down to earth and practical as we can. So that's some of the upcoming stuff. Today, though, I really do want to look at a passage with you out of James, because we said James is going to be sort of our guide, our friend, as we're going through this series. And this one's a pretty hard-hitting passage. It's right out of the beginning of the book. So here's what he says. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Last week, Karen shared pretty candidly about a verse that I read that she said she actually had a physical reaction to it when I said it, that it just was so not her favorite. That the verse that said, if you know what to do and you don't do it, then it's a sin. You know, it was just such a heavy verse. And I'm just curious, did anybody have a physical reaction to this verse as I read it today? Oh, the other one, yes. Yes, this one for me feels like really a heavy verse to go have joy in the middle of what you're going through. That feels tough. And this is kind of James's style all the way through the book. And if you have a struggle with James, you're in good company. Martin Luther is famous for a quote that he made about this book when he said, "It's a right strawy epistle." I don't even know fully what he meant by that, other than straw is flimsy and you know, you can't really build anything on it. He actually one time also said, "Away with James. I almost feel like throwing Jimmy into the stove," as the priest in Kallenberg did. There was a priest that had been taking wooden statues of the apostles and using them as firewood, and so Martin Luther thought that was a good idea for Jimmy. But he actually came around, and even Martin Luther ended up seeing value in the book of James eventually. And I do think that there's a lot even in this that we can take, and if we can allow it, if we can allow ourselves to sit with what it is that he's saying. Most of you are probably familiar with this quote: "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." Have you guys heard that before? Everybody heard that? Well, if it looks like Kurt Kafka there is unhappy, this is the guy who said it. He's unhappy because he never liked that translation of his statement. He said it first in German, and he said that he wasn't trying to add anything to the sum, like the sum of the parts. So greater wasn't the right word. He said really the word should be other. The whole is other than the sum of its parts. So an example of what he meant by that would be if you look at this picture and you see a triangle there in the middle, but there is no triangle. Right? It's your eyes are creating that triangle based on the whole picture. It is something other that isn't really there. So if you held up your hand and covered up two of those circles and you just saw one, all you would see would be a Pac-Man. You wouldn't there, because there is no triangle there. That's something that comes from seeing it as a whole. And I think when we look at this passage and we see it as a whole, our brains put something other on it that isn't really there, and that is this idea that what James wants for us is to be happy about something that really isn't happy, that we are to be full of joy in circumstances that are not joyful at all. At least that's how it has struck me at times. And so what I'd like to do this morning is take this passage, and instead of thinking about it as a whole, to really break it down into some pieces and look at individual parts by themselves, get that triangle out of there, and then see what we make of this. And I know that sometimes doing word studies can be a little tedious, but I think in this case it's actually really vital, and it's been helpful for me, even in going through it for myself this week, to read some things in a different way than I had before. So I want to start with this word right here of trials, because that really seems to be at the heart of this passage and what James is telling us to respond to. So can anybody give me a definition of trials? What do you think when you think that word trials? Yeah, Wayne? Test through difficulties. Yes. Hardships. Yes. Anything else come to mind? Challenges. Yeah. If you were to get into the technical definition of the term in the Greek, it means a putting to proof of something. You are testing almost to failure. You are testing the strength of something. When I was back working in advertising, one of our clients was a glass company that sold fire-rated glass for use in construction, where you needed to have it be fire resistant and offer some degree of protection. So in order to get that rating, because if you had a fire in a building and people are trying to get out, normal glass, just ordinary glass, is going to break and shatter if there's a fire. It's going to get too hot. It can't handle that. So you have to have this special glass. And so to get that approval, they would first put it into this furnace where they would heat it up to like 1,200 degrees or more. And in an official laboratory setting, they'd heat it up, make sure that it retained its integrity, stayed in the structure there. And then immediately afterwards, they would blast it with cold water from a fire hose, because also, if glass were in that situation, a lot of times that change in temperature, it can't handle that. So they would test that, and it's only after it's been through those tests that they could put a label on it that said that it was fire rated. So an inspector coming through could say, yeah, you can count on this. And there was all this controversy because there were certain products that didn't meet all the testing, wanting to be classified. And then you go, well, if it's in that situation and that happens, that's not going to work. So when we talk about ourselves and think about what James is talking about of us going through these trials, it is this idea of there being some testing of us, finding the strength that is in us. And what it's testing is the question, can I trust God through this? And so what's really being tested is not necessarily the amount of our faith as it is God's faithfulness. It's God being put to the test, and sometimes there are aspects of our trust in God, our belief, that need to be tested to failure, because there are some things that we're believing that just aren't true about God, and we need those ideas to be tested and then set aside. So that's part of what James is saying these trials are, that what they're about, that we're going through. Well, another thing that he says about these trials, he says they're trials of many kinds. And the word there for many kinds means variegated or multicolor. It's really a color word. And so when you think about our trials being multicolor, and I'll use this from printing, you essentially, and if you've changed your cartridges in your printer, you probably know this, but you've got cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Those are the four basic colors that are then combined to get all sorts of different colors that printers will use when they're getting any shade you want in the world. And with our own trials that we're going through, there are different aspects of our trials that shape what they look like. So if you think, okay, for example, the form those trials come in can vary greatly, right? We can have a small interruption in our life that's really not much. It's a bit of a trial, but it's just I guess, you just call it an interruption. Or you could have something more serious like an illness, or be dealing with grief, or pressure at work is a trial, or poverty and lack of something, or being attacked if somebody's being mean to you. You have all those different kinds of forms, and then you can have different causes to these trials. Some may feel like they come directly from God, or some might feel like they come from the devil. Some might just be your own stupidity that gets you into something. Or sin, your sin or somebody else's sin causes a problem for you. Life in general raises its own problems. The circumstance that you're in, all those things can be causes for it. And then there can be all sorts of different levels of severity. It can be a tiny little irritation, or can be something that's really costly, harmful to you, really eye-opening and life-changing or life-ending. Right now, we are puppy sitting, and it has yet to be determined whether it's just irritating or life-ending for either us or the dog. I'm not sure yet. But you can have all kinds of different levels of severity. And then you can have different durations. You can have something that's really quick and momentary and short-lived, or something that keeps coming up again and then leaving, or it's seasonal, it's long-term, or maybe it's lifelong. And so you put all those together and you think about the different ways they can combine, and you go, man, we've got some multicolor trials. They can take on all sorts of hues and shades. And what I love about what James says about these is he says all of them are significant. All of them have a piece to play in what he's talking about here. So, because a lot of times when it comes to trials and hard things, challenges that we're facing, we either are going, well, at least I'm not going through what whoever else is going through. I don't really have a right to complain because, and so we kind of diminish our own suffering because it's not as bad as somebody else's. Or we go the other way and say, man, nobody has any idea how bad it is for me. Mine it's the worst anybody's ever gone through. And James says, you know what? It's all part of the mix here. All of it. If it's bothering you, if it is something that is testing you and trying you, that's valid. And we don't have to justify it in the scheme of where it fits with anything else. So, I'll just pause right there for a second. Any thoughts about that idea of trials being multicolor?
I think that it broadens my scope from that one little word.
Yeah, I think Ron said it broadened his scope, and I really do like that, that it's so specific of a word about being multicolor, because that does just add layers to it, and I can narrow it down, or think that something that I'm going through doesn't really count as a trial when it does. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It shows you, it takes away the guilt, because it takes it out of that realm of comparison. Were you going to say something, Sandy?
Yeah, that God can use it all, that he works all
Yes.
things for the good of those who love him, called according to his purpose.
Yes.
It gives you some hope in your trial.
Yes, it does. It gives you hope, because God can use all of it. I want to go to the next word here, because I realize I'm going out of order, and this is probably driving some of you crazy. But the next word I wanted to grab is this whenever. Whenever you're experiencing these multicolor trials, because the word there, whenever, really means at the time that it's happening. And I like that because, I like it and I don't like it. I like it because it's not that I have to wait until I finally figure out the lesson that I'm supposed to learn from this, which usually feels like that's after the fact. Once I have some context for it, this is saying right in real time as this is going on. Now, the part I don't like about that is, who wants somebody telling you what you ought to be thinking or feeling while you're going through something, right? You don't want, you don't, that's annoying. For somebody telling you how you should be feeling or how you should be experiencing it. I go, just let me get through this, But I don't think that's what James is doing. I think he's actually saying there's something for us in the midst of it to find and discover that's going to help us get through it. So it's not so much instructional as it is encouragement, saying, right while you are in the midst of everything, God has something for us. And this is why I think this passage relates so specifically to this 2 Feet Out series, because it's what we've got to deal with right now. And we can't get very far ahead. So what does God have for us right in it as we are going through it? And then James, I'm going to jump up then to the very first word finally here, which is this word consider. James says we are to consider it pure joy when we go through these things. Well, I don't know about you, but most of the time when I'm going through something hard, that's not what I'm going to think about it. That's not what naturally is going to be in my head as something is difficult. And I like that this word consider actually means to command or to lead, because that really tells me that it's telling my brain, it's me taking charge of the thought and saying the way that I'm going to view this is this way. It's me leading my mind, leading my feelings around this in a direction and saying, okay, that's not where it's naturally going to go. So I think that's permission to say, I don't have to naturally feel that or think that, but I'm gonna choose that and go that direction. But what's even better is this, which is after the word consider, I want to rethink this pure joy piece, because what it turns out is that the word in the Greek for that pure joy is really recognized grace. Recognized grace. And I thought about that and I thought, boy, that is so freeing to me. To change the way I think about this, to have James say, listen, tell your brain that there is a recognized grace in this hard thing that you're going through. Because then I'm not telling myself how I have to feel about it, right? I don't have to work up some sort of joy and happiness about something that's really sad and hard. Instead, I can at that time recognize that God can have grace for me in the midst of it. It allows the thing to be what it is and says that God still has something for me. What I really love about this is that when Peter is talking about grace, he makes this little passing comment when he talks about God's grace in its various forms. And guess what? When he uses this word various, that's the same word that James used. That's that multicolor word. So not only do we have multicolor trials, but we have multicolor grace. We have God's multicolor grace. So we have his presence in Jesus saying he would be with us always through everything that we are going through. We have the gifting that he promises that is his equipping for us for whatever we're experiencing, insight to understand it and the strength to get through it. The diversity of everybody's gifting to help us and the growth that we can experience, that's part of God's grace. The church as a community, man, if you don't feel the grace that's in community after having it taken away for a while, that's powerful, and we're not isolated, and we have each other's testimony about God's faithfulness. That's part of the grace. We have support and love from each other, and also challenge from each other. That is grace. And then we have the fruit of the Spirit, the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, all of it that God gives us, and it's all His grace. It's all His grace. So you combine all these different things and you go, every different hue and shade of trial that we're going through can be met by a different color of grace. Every trial can be met by a different color of grace. And so what that means and what God is leading us to at the end of that is that we're not going to be lacking anything. And so often I feel like with trials and hard things, they're actually God kind of taking something away from me, stealing my joy, or stealing something that I love, or making life harder for me, when really where He's moving me toward is that ultimately being whole and complete, and having absolutely everything that I need. So that in itself is a grace. So as I think about all of this, then, what for me that means is that my prayer shifts from get me out of this, God, to show me more of your grace in this thing. I feel like so often we have those magic prayers, God make it disappear. We want Him to do a disappearing act on things. So often that's what our prayers are for other people. God, help them not go through this experience. Help this experience to end for them. And I'm more and more I go, I don't know that that's really all that God has for us in that. If He's saying, how about you just are open to whatever grace I have? Maybe the grace is ending it. Maybe the grace is something else through it. I think about Martha and Mary when their brother Lazarus died, and Jesus first encounters Martha about it, and Martha's first thing is, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. You could have made this disappear. And then she kind of gets spiritual about it a little bit and says, I know God can do whatever you'll ask, He'll still do it. And then he gets to Mary, and she says the same first part of that, where she says, if you'd been here, this wouldn't have happened. And she just leaves it there. That's where her prayer ends, and there is grace for her even in Jesus' response to that, because he doesn't rush to defend himself or prove anything. What does he do? He says, where is he? And he goes, and then he weeps. He enters into her experience of that, and he allows for that space. That, and even his response to our limited prayers about our trials are full of grace. And what I want for us as a church, what I want for myself, is to be able to shift that prayer and be able to instead be looking more for where God might be in the midst of it, even when it's hard, and let it be hard, but at the same time experience more of him. And I have felt that and seen that, and I know you have as well. I've talked a lot about how, initially with all my struggles with anxiety, that was absolutely my first prayer. Take this away, God. I don't understand how my brain is working different than it used to. And he didn't do it. He didn't answer that way, and yet he's met me with so much grace in forms that I didn't expect him to, that I can actually say, I'm glad he didn't answer that first prayer, because he wouldn't have filled in some things that were lacking for me. I think about us as a church being here and going, even in the hardship of having our routine broken where we were at Meeker, going, you know what? There are some things that have been dislodged in the way we're operating, that we're looking at things that God is turning over, and there is more momentum for things to change now than there ever has been, I think. And I go, that's a grace in the midst of God not just letting us have the pandemic last 2 weeks like we originally thought it was going to, you know. So I just wanted to take a moment here before we wrap up to just say, is there any other word of testimony that somebody has about how you have recognized some grace in the midst of a trial that you just wanted to acknowledge that you've seen some multicolor grace? Yeah.
I was taking care of my youngest daughter, and she had a very rare type of Parkinson's, where all your nerves start to die. And it was very, very difficult because I didn't understand it. At the time, there was no difficult or precise diagnosis. And her actions were very difficult because she was very difficult. I'm sure a lot of it was her frustration and anger, etc. And I had a friend drive all the way from Yakima to come down and pray with me, and then drive all the way back home 4 hours just to give me strength and comfort and to pray together, because I had no one to share it with. And it was very challenging. And through it all, God did put his hand of grace and mercy. In fact, I've learned some of these lessons through this experience, and through maturing myself. And it was a very eye-opening experience, because I would get angry when I heard about hey, you had to be joyful, you know.
Right,
about,
right.
oh,
Yes.
heck with that. But then I learned it isn't joy like that. It isn't a personal emotion. It's knowing that Jesus is with you. He's hearing you. He knows you're suffering. He is with you in this horrific time. And she did pass away, but I was able to be with her, thankfully, from my daughter-in-law helping me. And the peace that came from that was, I knew God understood 10 times more than I did what was needed. So
Thank you. Thank you for that. That is a powerful testimony. Thank you so much. That is a gift right there. Thank you.
It made me think, it kind of undoes our narratives of, I'm weak, or I can't do this, or I'm too scared. All the narratives that we bring with us into our life it's more Gideon, like, go in the strength you have. Like, how can I be stronger in this? How can I be more resilient in moving from I want to rescue to I'm going to bring resilience and courage to this by the grace of God. It flips the narrative. There's more of us to take in more of him.
Yes, I like that. There's more of us to take in more of him. Yeah.
I think about like you say, get me out of this. That is just like such a regular heart cry for me around so many things that I've experienced in my life. And show me more of your grace in this. I feel like it's just that I can look back when I've been through all these different trials in my life, and that is just so true. So I just love the reminder of it. And I don't remember where it is in scripture, but beauty from ashes. I just claim that truth all the time, because I feel like I have seen God make beautiful things out of just what feels like it's been burned to the ground. Over and over and over. So.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, and it's not that it's wrong to ask for the rescue. Because sometimes God does that. Sometimes that is his form of grace. And even as we're asking, he can work on us through that asking. But yeah, so often it is a beauty from ashes. Yeah, CJ.
So probably 16 years ago when we moved up here, I had severe anxiety and panic attacks to the point that I couldn't leave my house for about 3 months. And at the time, I was going to a different church and had someone do a Bible study with me about this verse. And since that time, it has been a very hard verse for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because it felt like, in the midst of all the trials we've had since that time and during that time, I should be giving my focus to joy.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never looked at it this way before.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a gift today to
Mm-hmm.
give that
Mm-hmm.
verse back to me in a different way
Mm-hmm.
so that I can see God's grace in that for me.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that and sharing that. Because I think that's the lens that we put on it so often, and it feels just like pressure then, more than anything, yeah, Sandy?
Just to agree with CJ, I actually was thinking about this verse a couple of days ago, so I sat down and Googled all the Bible verses on joy because I was thinking, I don't know how to do this joy. Like, what does that actually mean in Scripture? And I just kind of got overwhelmed by other verses that didn't seem like they really explained it to me. So this is a grace. This sermon is a grace to me. After this week of contemplating this verse and Googling joy and looking for verses that would try and explain to me how on earth,
Yeah.
how do we do this? And it's not us.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I realize also that there are a lot of you in this room who aren't at a place where you can recognize the grace in the middle of what you're going through, because everybody's got different trials. And so I want to close before the Forbes come and lead us in one more song. I just want to close with a prayer for those of you who are feeling like you're going through it and you just can't see God's grace for you in it right now. So let's go ahead and stand as we pray. And if you feel like if you go, yeah, that is me. Just as we all bow our heads, just if you feel like, yeah, I'm in a place where I'm having a hard struggle to actually see where God is in the midst of what I'm going through, and you would like to just symbolically say, pray for me in that prayer, would you just slip up your hand where you're at? I'd love to just, yeah. I'd love to, yeah. God, I thank you for the honesty of people who are saying, look, it's just hard right now. I don't want to hear about this trial having value because it's just painful. And God, I get that is sometimes exactly where we're at with these difficulties that seem senseless at times, that have no redeeming value in our minds. They just are ongoing and relentless, and we're tired. And so I pray for each person who is feeling beyond the limit right now, God, where they can look around and all they see is more trouble. And they feel surrounded by it. And God, I pray that you would meet them in the middle of it, even if they are not able to see you right now. God, would you be there with them, be their strength? And Jesus, you're the one who brought sight to the blind, and so would you heal up eyes to be able to see your grace in places where it seems invisible right now. Would you meet each one in a new way, Lord, as even their admission that they can't see you is a cry for help. And so would you hear it? And would you show yourself to them? You love to be found. And so, God, we just ask that you would be findable. And we pray for each of us, God, as we are looking for more of your grace. May we see just how vast and colorful it is for us. And thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen.